folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver and to a special edition of The Shrink and the Pundit with integral psychotherapist Dr. Keith Witt. On Wednesday, we saw a mob assault the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of the presidential election. 5 people have died so far. The insurrection was incited by a sitting president of the United States, whose flag then waved from the broken windows beneath the Rotunda. As these astonishing events have sunk in over the last few days, there's a growing sentiment that Trump and rabid Trumpism must be condemned and contained, and that his political energies, mean red in developmental terms, are poisonous to the hard-won civility of a modern culture. Keith and I, as always, do our best to sort it out. Keith has the first question. Thank you for listening.
Let me start by asking you a question, Jeff.
Yes.
Okay. What has been your reaction to the events since the election? The whole drama, the whole movie that we've been seeing. I don't see how they could ever make a movie about this because the movie has already been made and we've been watching it.
I know. Isn't it something?
It couldn't be any more traumatic or any more weird.
Yeah.
So what have been your reactions culminating in the attack?
Yeah.
Capitol building.
Yeah.
And 5 people dying.
Yeah.
And a bunch of cops in the hospital.
I know. No. Well, I've been horrified but not surprised by what's happened since the election with Trump. Actually, I've been encouraged by what's happened with the legal response and how the institutions of modernity, which is what the American governmental system is, shared power, that sort of thing, how that worked. And I'm encouraged by that. But I realized, my revulsion for Trump has grown immensely, and I'm not sure that I thought it could. Because I've been revolted from, I've always found him to be a clown, but birtherism caused my, unrepentant hatred for him. And it's sort of one of my integral practices is when I hate somebody or hate something, I at least notice that that says as much about me as it does them. These are 2 cosmic addresses who, are just at terrible odds. And then, so I realized that. And then I realized that that's true in a good way. In that and I think you really helped me with this. I was thinking about it because it was the last conversation we had where we were talking about it's actually appropriate in terms of evolution to be repulsed by the stages that come before.
Yes.
Now, part of what we need to do is get friendlier to the immediate stages that, that we're so postmodern, don't be so repulsed by modernity and traditionalism. But there's something about red that, bad red needs to be condemned and really, spat out.
Yes.
And I've been thinking of a title of a podcast I might want to do just a quick one called Puke Him Out.
Yeah.
Puke him out because it's appropriate and significant for history that this behavior of inciting a riot through just false,
lies, big lies.
Exactly, big lies, which we've talked about before is pre-modern. It's, it's mythic. There are people who have antenna for that, who respond to it. We still have to deal with them. But we can say that this is unacceptable. And so 25th Amendment doesn't look like it's going to happen, but let's get this impeachment thing done. Let's not let him stay in there another minute longer than necessary. So that's where I arrived today. How about you?
Well, the thing that surprised me about the Capitol building is one, I was really excited about it. Okay. I was fascinated. I am fascinated. I was exhilarated uh, by the consequences that it's echoing into the legislature. And I was ashamed. I wasn't any particularly ashamed of how we looked at the world and all that stuff, all the Banana Republic stuff. I was ashamed of myself and my friends back in 1969 and 1970.
Interesting.
I don't know anything about black riots or riots in cities. I know a lot about white riots because I was a student in the student riots. And I wasn't in them much because after I was demonstrating, and every once in a while a demonstration would turn into a riot. Well, there were certain kinds of classes of people in a riot. There's the crazy people looking to do violence up front who feel morally justified. Those are the alpha bully types. Then there's the beta bully types that are behind them and then joining in. Then there's the people that are like-minded and interested, but to them it's kind of a joke. I'm kind of there. You saw that expression on everybody's face. By the way, a vast number of those young men in the Capitol, they were stoned on something. You don't go into that with those goofy expressions on your face unless you're loaded on something. Then there's people that are around because they believe in the political consciousness and self-righteously believe in it, very much like we did back. We thought they think they're getting the right information and the government's giving them shitty information. Well, back in 1969, the government was telling us that it was a just war and that everything was fine in Vietnam. We weren't bombing Cambodia. We were getting data from the Pentagon Papers and so on. We thought we were getting the real stuff. There's this self and other where I didn't really care about the people who got terrorized when the Bank of America was burned down in Isla Vista. Mm-hmm. I've been kind of proud of the Bank of America being burned down in Isla Vista, the symbol of extractive capitalism and stuff. I'm ashamed of it now. I'm ashamed that we did that. Mm-hmm. I'm ashamed that I didn't feel bad about it. I'm ashamed that I didn't have empathy for the police officers who were in Isla Vista, frightened of all these college students and, these riot situations. It was taking me back into going, okay, I've experienced this psychology and these people. There's a friend of mine that went underground and stayed underground for 20 years because he set off a bomb because he believed he needed to set off a bomb. Yeah. And he was this crazy guy, not very self-reflective. Yeah. The people in this riot were invited to D.C. They flew to D.C. wanting to be part of the tribe. Yeah. They were all set up. They got all wired up to ready to go. Trump sent them over there to do all that stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing that is so shocking. And I think will really make this day live in infamy in ways that none other would or will in terms of political violence in recent past, or the last 50 years even. It's the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah.
They're waving Trump flags from the broken windows on either side of the Rotunda.
And Confederate flags.
And this is orchestrated by the sitting president of the United States who's watching it on a monitor. And it all adds up, the indelible images. You know how important that is. I mean, it just gets us on such a deep level. It's pre-verbal, really.
Yeah.
And so this is, and we've seen in the last couple of days, this is now Friday, this happened Wednesday. The call for impeachment is rising, certainly among the more mainstream Republicans and Democrats. It may be enough, I don't know. And it takes 2/3 to get an impeachment. And it would be a message to history that we're really beyond being held in the thrall of a red tyrant, that we really just even can't let him finish his term. There's too much symbolism here.
Well, that would be great, though. I gotta say, there's a lot of rats leaving a sinking ship on this thing. I mean, there was a lot of people going after the Republican senators who were going to do this whole farce in those 4 or 5 hours, and I think that's why some of them changed their minds. So now it's in their faces. You're being locked down. There's people being shot in the chamber over next to you, and the woman who got shot, The woman who got shot was from California. She was an ex-Air Force person. She thought she's been told that the California government is screwing everybody up and the federal government is screwing everybody up and that there's only one hope for true freedom, and that's just to bring it all down.
Yep.
And so she was out there screaming and shouting and wanting to climb through the glass to get into the chamber, and she was killed.
Yeah.
And that's not just on Trump.
In her
that's
case, I mean, you
thing.
saw a lot of these people wandering around with their cameras and their shorts and their backpack. These were not battle ready people, but she was actually. She was there for the mayhem, and that's actually one of the things that, even just to reflect back on what you were saying about when you were a student radical, Keith.
Yeah, I was a student radical. I admit
you were a student radical. Is that with all of this, even with this orchestration of in this pumping of red bullshit into the culture by the President of the United States. The amount, what we can see is that people on the left and the right are almost entirely nonviolent. And then there's red, who comes in and infects both. When they see a demonstration or they see a big, social unrest, they come in for the mayhem.
That's right.
And
that's well said. I think it's that pathological red infecting and boy, that's a deadly combination.
Yeah, it is, and it's what both sides sort of forgive their crazies, and extra demonize the other person's crazies,
which is what we did in the 70s, in the late 60s and 70s.
We want to notice that as an integralist. If we want to move beyond just the straitjacket of doctrinaire progressive thinking, we've got to see what in terms of who's more violent, the left or the right. It's a complex question. If you're looking at the last 100 years, the right by 1,000 times. If you just Jim Crow, period.
There you
go. Whole legal system. So since the 60s, the 60s it turned, and there was violence from the left. We have what happened. Let's even just look at the last 12 months. It's true that, let's look at Wednesday. If that had been a Black Lives Matter demonstration called into being by Barack Obama, who was feeding the worst kind of Marxist bullshit into the system, and there was 40,000 of them or 30,000, whatever it was, we would have seen a phalanx of riot police surrounding the whole thing, and that's what we should have seen here. Of course, I mean that's another whole issue that is crazy, is how they sort of waltzed in.
But fascinating.
Yeah, and fascinating. And race is part of that answer, a big part of that answer.
It really is.
So, but we can also see that in Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, that it was the other way around. If those cities had been occupied in the same way that they were occupied by the left, by the Proud Boys, we would have seen it on the news a whole lot more. Let's just put it that way.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And as an integralist, let's see that.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to own it in the way that we used to have to before. We don't have to justify our crazies and demonize theirs. We can see that we're all good people here, and we're infected by this red. The infection of bad red is a big categorical problem we have to deal with on the planet, really.
I agree, and I've been saying forever that violence is the problem.
Yeah, bright line.
Now this is where the invisible audience thing comes in.
Okay, good.
All right.
Let's just set the stage. That's what we were going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And so just give us a little bit of what that is, and then let's plug it into this scene.
What I mean by the invisible audience is we are incredibly social. Everything is relationships. Okay, so how do we stay social? We all have an egocentric part of us. We all have a red part of us. What keeps us all so social all the time? Well, once we develop a theory of mind when we're 2 years old, we can observe ourselves and other people as thinking beings. We begin to have an audience in us of us watching ourselves, observing ourselves, whether we're being pro-social or not. But we don't feel like it's us observing us. We think it's our family or our tribe observing us. It's an invisible audience, okay? From an integral standpoint, when you're a red, your invisible audience is a red audience. Okay. When you're an amber, your invisible audience is an amber audience.
Yes.
You know, all the way up into teal. Okay. I mean, right now, you and I have invisible audiences that are teal and turquoise audiences. When you and I vary from, when I fall into self-righteousness, when I fall into, you know, violence on the left is more excusable than violence on the right, my integral invisible audience says, Keith, you know, that doesn't feel quite right. Okay. And I am, because by the time you're operating at that altitude, you have a robust witness. There's a lot of self-reflection. You don't resist self-reflection. You start making adjustments. And this is why you have flex flow consciousness and a felt appreciation from multiple points of view when you're operating at an integral altitude.
Yeah. And it's fun, your blind spots. It's like, I can breathe this in now. I can inhabit this territory.
And thank you, Green. Thank you, Green,
totally.
for having self-reflection and self-observation be a foundation of Green.
Yes.
And thank you, Green, for having self-observation and self-reflection about whether I'm doing the right thing and whether I'm being caring to other people, being a central part of Green.
Yeah, especially people who have been left out of the circles of care that came before.
Yes. Especially them. And so self-reflection has been migrating from green down into orange and amber as a result of spiritual but not religious.
Yeah. Well, and just the whole proliferation of the psychological as a thing.
Yeah. Everybody knows what the unconscious is. You know, when I was a kid, there were a lot of people that didn't know what the unconscious was. Okay. Well, not everybody. You know, it doesn't really matter. You know, you could have an 8th grade education and you know what the unconscious is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that invisible audience is always there. Now, you can see, as you talk about having this red, this is a perfect storm waiting to happen when you have a bunch of people that don't self-reflect, who have an invisible audience that's watching whether they're pleasing Daddy, Trump, and pleasing all the people around them. When they're in an environment, a container that is amplifying their emotions, they are told by the leader, go to the Capitol building and fight. And now, okay. And the people that have been looking for a reason to do violence to a person, they're at the front. They're really looking for something to happen. You have a bunch of cops who on the weekend put on MAGA hats and go to MAGA rallies. You know, these cops have no problem beating up black people, brown people, and hippies, but, you know, it's really hard to beat up other, you know, fellow rednecks, you know, or fellow crackers or fellow Trumpers. They have incredible inhibitions around doing that. So they don't know it, but they have it.
Well,
and,
I mean, if you talk about invisible audiences, they're in the same tribe.
Exactly.
You know, so
am I going to beat my tribe?
You know, these people are not. These are patriots. They're here doing theater, you know, or whatever you say, or they ought to be here. We need to turn this around. They actually may believe Trump's fantasy. Yeah. Well, one thing I want to point out is that the good news is out of this is that Trump, for sure, is a discredited figure. Not by everybody. I think his Trump-loving base will shrink to maybe 20% from 30. But from the reasonable, movable middle, this guy is toast. And I think that's true. I mean, do you or?
I would be shocked if more than 3% of the people that are for Trump have changed. You know, they just explain it away, just like we did.
No, I know.
Just like I explained the Bank of America burning down. You know, so what? You know, remember, to them, unless the violence is happening to them or someone in their presence, it's just a cartoon.
Yeah.
There's not empathy for people that get injured, whose lives are wrecked. You know, Trump has wrecked so many people's lives. Okay? There's no empathy for that.
Here's somebody in their own words saying what you're saying, and this is from Gateway Pundit, which is one of the last bastions of Trumpism online. It's a aggregator of stories, and this is in the comment section, and this is from somebody, JD. We are all enslaved. Pretend otherwise, but as long as we refuse to truly fight, we are finished. Look at the snow job the deep state elites and their minions have done with that orchestrated agent provocateur, quote, siege of the Capitol. What kind of siege is committed by unarmed people? Little destruction caused, and with police willfully allowing the, quote, rioters in while taking selfies with them. Oh, and with tens of thousands outside. If patriots wanted the Capitol, they could have easily taken it among other buildings. Think of that. So they think it was staged, basically.
Yeah.
They and their invisible audiences will believe that, right?
Yes. If you can believe in QAnon, you can believe pretty much in anything.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now those news stations were able to pump big lies to Reddit Amber people who were pissed off and disenfranchised. And then the Republican Party and the donor class that didn't want to change things because they're making a lot of money with extractive capitalism, they have been exploiting that for 50 years, and here we are. And this is one thing about this that really is exciting to me, okay? Because remember, I'm ashamed, but I'm also having a good time, and I'm totally excited. We're going to have a flood of legislation trying to address all the problems that have been getting worse and worse and worse for 10 years. And I think that there's a lot of green legislatures that have popped through, have had teal peak experiences. And Keith.
Can we wrap our head around the fact that we had Barack Obama for 8 years as president of the United States?
Oh,
do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean,
this, he to me is an exemplar of integral. I mean, whether he knows it or not, just flexibility of mind, multiple perspectives.
Completely.
And then we have 4 years of Trump. I mean, it's really, what's evolution doing here? I mean, this is something, and I actually, think differentiate and integrate is one of the things that's happening is that I do think, Keith, I don't know if you're going to agree with this, but I think the people who marched on the Capitol, and actually the people who bought Fox News over the last whatever, these people who marched on the Capitol feel as left out of mainstream American culture as do the Black Lives Matter people.
I actually, not only do I agree with that, I personally think that the people that are going to benefit most from the legislation that's going to be coming out over the next 2 years are the Trump base.
Yeah.
And my personal anger with the Democratic Party is that they haven't served those people adequately, or communicated adequately with them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate for them. I actually feel for these people that they got hijacked by a malicious, narcissist, malignant con man. Yeah. Instead of just a regular narcissistic con man like, say, Ted Cruz.
Yeah,
could have actually led them, to the promised land in a certain way with, here's what Trump did do. I mean, Trump brought out the hegemony of the left in the culture. He took that on. It's a true thing.
Yes, he did.
And and people who have been left behind from cool green culture, which I'm totally at home with and love. A lot of people didn't make it there. They're still corny and patriotic and religious, and they feel as left out of. So that's what Trump did. Is he did a full force attack on that, and the media too, which was knitted in this modern media, that modern and postmodern media. I think we needed a media arm on the right, and I think we still do, and we actually now have a new split off version of Newsmax. Which I've been watching.
Think about, just for a moment, how we all feel about Germans and Japanese right now, okay? I have positive feelings about Germans and Japanese. I have German and Japanese friends and clients. I feel positive about their cultures. They seem progressive to me. I have a lot of affection. I think Merkel is probably the most enlightened leader in the world today. Okay. So how do I feel about Germans and Japanese when I was a kid hearing about World War II? Okay. And what I was doing is I was projecting the worldview of the leader onto all the people, instead of recognizing that the people are going to have they're going to have, just like any other culture, about 10% red, about, they're going to have those kinds those kinds of breakdowns, and that there's a certain amount of them, if they're told that Americans are the devil, then Americans are going to be the devil, and they're going to do that until they figure something else out. In those cases, because they were fascist regimes, first there was the external constraint, which, they were bombed to oblivion, and then they had a chance to build progressive democracies. I think that's true for all the people, North Korean people, Iranian people. Basically, if you get down to them on a personal basis, they're people that would rather, be world-centric and rather have that if they're given the opportunity. But
I'm not sure that's true, vulnerable. Keith. I'm not sure that part's true. That, if we look at the breakdown of state culture in, say, Japan and Germany in the 30s and 40s, there'd be a whole lot of red. There'd be a whole lot of, holy warriors, basically.
Yeah.
Red, blue, unholy mix, where you're willing to die for your country and for the leader and all of that stuff. And what percentage of Japanese and German people do you think are there now? Vanishingly small.
Vanishingly small, yeah.
But there's still some, but and part of that is, and this is the sort of one of the conundrums, moral conundrums of integral and cultural evolution, is tragedy brings a lot of growth.
So Steve Bannon was right then.
Well,
Steve Bannon said tear it down to have something new come in its place.
Yeah. And Trump
so far, he's been the most accurate prognosticator.
Yeah. Well, it's characteristic in using his terms of the fourth turning of this cycle of cultural growth and decay. And then you have a new growth. And I actually think that we may be at a inflection point for that.
I think so.
To move into a new first turning. And I think you and I have talked about this before, because, one of the sort of touchstones I have about how far I've come is I remember hating and loathing Mitt Romney and John McCain. And against my Obama. Those two. And now it's like I think back and I want to hug them. It's like we could have been friends all of these years. Like Betty Davis to Joan Crawford. All of these years we could have been friends. But so maybe we will move beyond, not the crazies on either side. And
I agree with that.
There's this sort of people within the 20-yard lines, maybe.
I was amazed at how much affection I felt for Mitt Romney when he was giving his speech. I was thinking to myself, I think I'm looking at the next president, because either he runs and wins in 2024, or he runs and wins in 28. Because if I look at him, if somebody like me looks at him and feels the appreciation amount of love and trust in his integrity, what that tells me, I felt the same way when I looked at Hillary and was pissed off at her for how she was talking about that. If somebody like me is pissed off, I don't think she can win. Okay. Mm-hmm. Somebody like me looks at Mitt Romney and go, God, what a great guy.
Don't we need a Mormon next anyway?
Sure.
In general. He does have that, and this development we can see. There is a installation of traditionalism, of blue, amber, whatever you want to call it.
That's okay. Healthy in the Mormon,
absolutely, very healthy traditionalism.
Yeah,
that may be just the ticket.
I think so.
And he's a spring chicken, for God's sake, because he's only 65.
Only 65. He's younger than you and me. That blows my mind.
I know.
That just blows my mind.
So, a couple other things. I am tempted to ask you, who's Trump's invisible audience? He says he talks only to himself. What's that? You're the psychotherapist. I want you to tell me what that means.
It's funny. I've thought about this. He's the most isolated, psychologically isolated person, and I think in his worldview, if he's not being agreed with or praised or indulged, that creates anxiety, which then generates rage. And so if we were into that White House, we would be looking into a White House very much like the court of Caligula. Caligula had similar psychology. Caligula was immature. He was self-indulgent. He had absolutely nothing beyond egocentric gratification. And Caligula at a dinner party would get pissed off at somebody and execute them. He would have somebody take them away. He had a special group of centurions that would take somebody away and just execute them. So pathological narcissism is if I'm not being indulged, something bad's happening. And there is incredible resistance to any kind of self-reflection.
Yeah. Now, is this a developmental thing? Is this garden variety red? Because I think it's sort of a big daddy thing, where you're either a tyrant or you're submissive to a tyrant, or is this just a psychological disorder that's its own thing, or both?
Well, if you take somebody that is born aggressive, emotionally reactive but aggressive, and you indulge them. For instance, Caligula was raised out in the hinterlands by the Roman army, and basically he could do whatever he wanted, and they were used to taking orders, and he was the emperor's designate, and so he was completely indulged. Trump was indulged. Now, as he progressed, he found he got gratification from hurting other people and betraying other people and ripping other people off. And his psychologist niece has one story after another about him doing that. And so that level of indulgence just kept reinforcing, one, the narcissistic entitlement and the need for narcissistic supply, and two, whenever he was threatened with self-awareness, he would attack whoever was threatening him with self-awareness. And he happened to have a father that supported and encouraged his development as doing this. Mm-hmm. Now, his father wanted to build wealth. So Trump thought that he wanted to build wealth too. But he needed to have the subjective sense of making things happen and of have people doing what he wanted to do and people that frustrated him being punished. And he loved hearing about it. Cohen would call Cohen and he, after Cohen screwed somebody, and he says, tell me what they said. Tell me what they did. He wanted to feed off of the suffering that they had being bullied by him. So it's pathological narcissism indulged. And then what you have is you have calculating people like McConnell, and you have ass kissers like Lindsey Graham. And they're going to go wherever the power is, and they're going to go where the influence is. And then all of it, and they believe that he can be manipulated, and he can, because he's not as smart as a lot of the other dictators. There was another article about people being comparing Trump to banana republics. Trump would be devastated by the least South American dictator.
I know. In some ways, he was enabled by a modern government system because there really wasn't any kind of red opposition.
And so his psychology is that. And so that's his psychology. And it's been obvious to everybody who sees psychology and to people that want him to be part of their emergent narrative, all the stuff that we've talked about endlessly about the pathologies, the cultural pathologies of America. All those people saw him as somebody that could continue their extractive capitalism and can continue them staying in power, continue them taking as much as they can from the collective and giving as little. He was going to support that, and so they went along and said, sure, we're fine with it. Yeah. And that's just how it's been for the last 5 years. That's my analysis, and I'm sticking with it.
I know you are. I'm not sure. My Venn diagram is adequately set with yours, I think. But
yeah, I think we're pretty well aligned.
Story, but well, actually, it's interesting to me because this profession of being a political leader is an interesting one. When you talk about Mitch McConnell and. I don't want to have to hate Mitch McConnell anymore. I don't know. That's sort of my starting new practice. I don't know where it's going to lead me.
Well, Mitch McConnell is a great employee of the people of the people that put him in power.
Well, if you want to talk about extractive capitalism. It's basically the one way of looking at the modern, capitalist machine. It's extractive. It's caused enormous destruction. It's killed half of the natural world. I mean, let's just start there, okay? It's also created this amazing artificial world, if you want to call it that, but the world of humanity and civilization where we have tripled lifespans and the decency to be able to, not have lice and the indoors.
That's a good one.
I want to give two cheers to that.
Well, that's healthy. That's healthy.
Exactly.
Capitalism.
And that Mitch McConnell is serving that, not necessarily always in a bad way.
I agree.
And so I want to look at so the more challenging character is like a Ted Cruz.
Whoa.
So Ted Cruz, who is leading the charge of this election fraud thing, when he himself was accused of that by Trump when he beat him in Iowa in the Republican primaries, so he's gone through that. He has been humiliated by Trump, Lion Ted. His wife, his father, all of this. Cruz has described Trump as a perfect example of a college textbook narcissist. He said the worst things imaginable about Trump. So here he is doing that. And I get that you have to do that if you want to be a senator from Texas, because, 80% of the people still support Trump. And I was reading that 65% of Republicans think that this was one of those instant YouGov polls, so I don't know, and we'll see how it shakes down. But it was well over half of Republicans thought that the occupation of the Capitol was justified. So he wants to lead these people, and in some ways he fundamentally does agree with them. I'm trying even to not hate Ted Cruz. That's a big job. I mean, but
me too. I'm trying to not hate him too, Jeff. Yeah. And I appreciate that you're struggling with it, because God, I try to do it. Not hating Ted Cruz is very much like the abused spouse. I'm trying not to hate the guy. He's been acting.
Well, the guy who I'm not done hating, and I have no interest in ever stopping hating? Trump. So, I have my people outside the line of I'm not even trying. And he's one of them.
Well, if you put Charlie Manson in charge of the U.S. government, really bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, it's not the worst comparison.
Charlie Manson is a damaged person. The process was designed to hopefully to not put a damaged person in charge of stuff. Unfortunately, it's arranged now that people can promote damaged people for other interests and put damaged people in charge. Yeah.
As long as you remember, Keith, that the part of their argument too is that they have been left out of mainstream Americans.
I agree. It doesn't. It really
and part of
doesn't.
It actually
matter.
Overlaps, because a lot of what Trump was doing was trying to be populist, in the sense. Well, withdrawing troops.
Yeah, that's right.
Trade wars. I mean, it may be a clunky, old-fashioned attempt at it. I don't know, or just diluted. I don't know. But
he was trying. You're right.
But the idea that let's build in America, and chastising these companies and calling out their CEOs and that sort of thing. Even I don't want to ever find myself in the position of defending Trump. So let's use other examles. I just can't do it anymore. I can't. I just don't have the stomach.
But let's go to the core part of what you're talking about, which is that we're the wealthiest country in the world, right? Yes. And in the wealthiest country in the world, 95% of the people in this country worry about money every day. And 50% of the people of this country don't have enough security in every imaginable fashion.
Yes.
The wealthiest country in the world, and we have hundreds of millions of people that are not being adequately cared for and are being lied to and are not being adequately educated, given the opportunity, not given adequate opportunity. It's very, very difficult in America to move up a socioeconomic class. Yeah. The best that happens in some areas is 12%. Usually it's around 4 or 5%. That's a shameful statistic. Okay, so the people at the bottom have obviously been left behind in the wealthiest country of the world. They turn on the television every night and there's people doing way better than them, and they're pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And their towns get screwed by somebody, and the government lets somebody screw it, so they get pissed off at the government. Okay, so that's absolutely true.
Yeah. And there are two places where it's egregiously true. One is the center city that the left is concerned about. The other is the rural white places.
That's getting hollowed out now.
Yeah, both of them. And both of these people have a point. And populism, this is where, that Trump drew more black people than he did the first time, and Hispanics. And again, I don't want to talk about Trump. But there's a place where the Venn diagram overlaps. That's the interests of both of what we see as the oppositional extremes have a lot in common. And it is against the sort of mindless meritocracy of modernism, of the middle.
Well, it's the illusion of meritocracy.
Exactly.
The America is built on the illusion of meritocracy.
Yes. I'll grant you that. I mean, I still think, having been a beneficiary of it, that it exists, but not in the way that we thought it existed. And that's why, when I hear your critique of America, I just want to be, I don't want to be pulled to necessarily doctrinaire, progressive and leftist solutions to this problem.
But that being said, I think that how is it going to happen? It's going to happen if enough green people pop into teal to understand that they need a different process to change the system than they've been espouting and believing in for the last 60 years.
Yes.
And this is why I really like what happened last week as a motivator for the incoming Congress. It's like, I really like them looking at, look, this is what happens if you guys can't take charge and make systemic change. Okay?
Yes.
So you got 2 years to take charge and make systemic change, and you're going to get opposition from these other people. You're not going to get help.
Because 30% of the population and 80% of Republicans have ears to hear the rantings of the psychopath, basically.
Right.
And that's a problem. That's a problem.
That's a problem.
So anyway, to me, and this is one of the things I talk about with Mcintosh is, what's the methodology of moving beyond into a teal turquoise political view? And the best we've come up with is a win-win-win in the sense that let's, at least as a method, look at solving problems where the key argument of green wins, that is marginalized, sensitized, we want to bring everybody into the system, right past wrongs, that gets served. There's modern, that it makes sense, that it be competitive, that it be subject to reason. And
that capitalism is allowed to function.
Yeah, exactly. And then traditional, in that people who aren't necessarily on board with multiculturalism, and they actually want to be with their own kind, and they're not really going to be totally plugged into the system, but there's something about America and something about having a community that works, where if you put in 40 hours, you could have a little house and a family, and that gets served too, that's a new politics, and it's not just reflexive ideology anymore. It's ideological.
I've read some of his stuff, and I think he's onto something. Salud Carbajal.
You're talking Steve Mcintosh.
Steve Mcintosh,
His book, Developmental Politics, really great.
The stuff that I've seen, I haven't read the whole book, but I've read parts of his premise that is happening in that the representative from my area, Salud Carbajal, is part of a bipartisan working group that has come up with some initiatives that are bipartisan initiatives. The one thing that I would add to that, and I think that's the future, the one thing that I add to that is I think there's a larger context that Green has ignored forever. And the larger context is exactly the context. It's the Karate Kid context, okay? If somebody is wired to dominate, if you want them to cooperate, you have to kick their ass. You have to provide external constraint. And you have to do it cleanly, you have to do it efficiently, and you have to do it strategically. And you have to understand that once we provide that external constraint, then you can start these bipartisan initiatives, and people and then the people on the right will join with the people on the left, and the people on the left, if they're wise enough, will join with people on the right and create them. If you don't have that element of, we got to provide that external constraint first before we can insist on that, it's not going to work. And it hasn't worked ever since Carter. It hasn't worked. And so I think what I'm hoping from this big explosion is that Green is pissed off enough that they go, okay, first we're going to do I'm really impressed with what people like Amy Klobuchar, Mitt Romney, and people are saying. They're saying, look, let's just stop fucking around here. There's a lot of problems. Let's stop focusing on Trump so much. Let's start solving problems. And it could be the dawning of the integral age.
The age of Aquarius.
Yeah. Let's start singing it.
In some ways, but I think it will. I think it will be, actually, even just if I look at the theory and look at what's happening. I'm not unimpressed by the response of the intelligentsia to what's happened. I think people are having very sophisticated understandings of it, taking all kinds of things into account. And, there's still the crazies, but that's the part that I love what you're talking about. If we look at that, we have, okay, there's going to be people that are on either side of those 20-yard lines. So there's going to be people on both sides who, they're a little bit crazy. We build our constraints and we sort of deal with them and we get friendly to them and try to serve them anyway. But that there is a new middle that's not just a new blender, but a new higher ground. Not common ground, higher ground, where we can really see, let's move the ball here.
I think Pelosi and Schumer are ready to do that.
Yeah.
I think that they've been wanting to do that for 10 years. I really do. And if we were talking with them, they're sitting around seriously planning exactly what you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
And they're going to hit the track running on January 20th, and I think Biden is on board with this.
Yeah.
I think what we're going to see is a lot of awakened people, and part of the agenda is going to be, one, communicating way better to rural America and inner city America, and two, a lot of really irresistible invitations to moderate Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to say, we're going to give you power if you're willing to participate and co-create with us. You want to create the new Republican Party, Mitt Romney? Jump over and let's do this initiative on immigration, or health care, because you originally came up with the idea in Massachusetts anyway. Okay, and so on.
Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. There's a lot of people who are in the Republican Party who are willing to be reasonable and move the ball.
We think so. And if they're given an opportunity to have political power doing that, they could give their constituents some cool stuff and could make them look good, while the other people are looking like the crazies. I think that a new middle coalition could be crafted. And what's really excited about that to me, but if somebody like Romney is the next Republican president, that we don't lose that with the next Republican. It could be, something that you and I say a lot, indirectly and directly, is this could be a lot more fun and a lot more effective. The whole deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that integral, whether you understand integral or not, integral understanding is a map that so far has been closer to the real territory than any other map that we've discovered.
I agree.
Politically, psychologically, as well as other things.
Yes.
Okay? And one of the reasons that it is because once you get to teal, you don't have a static map anymore. You have a living map that keeps adjusting to the territory
Absolutely.
rather than trying to adjust the territory to the map.
Yes.
And once a culture
these
starts,
multitudes are contained. You get the sensitivity of green, the rationality of orange, the patriotism of traditionalism, and all of them matter to you.
Well, that reminds me, what do you think of the fact that Facebook banned Trump for the next 2 weeks and Twitter temporarily banned him is considering?
Yep.
That the social media giants now are taking more social responsibility for what's happening on their platforms and specifically silencing Trump on their platforms. What's your read of that, Jeff? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's good. And I think it's a dawning awareness that you can't just allow, and again, development helps here. You just can't give red and these early stages free reign on the internet because people can't handle it. I mean, it actually is pernicious. And the Ku Klux Klan was relegated to mimeograph machines 50 years ago. They just couldn't talk to each other. They couldn't get together. They were vanishing into history. But what I think these people are doing is taking responsibility for what goes out on their platforms. They have to at some point.
But also, every once in a while, you have somebody at the head of something, like the Gates Foundation. There's somebody at the head of something that goes, okay, now I want to be a tribal 4 leader. I want to serve the world. I don't think that's going to naturally happen with capitalism, but I think if there's enough external constraint, those leaders in different industries could make a huge difference.
And a lot of it is just the consciousness of their consumers, the people who work for them. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has to listen to the people who work for him who are horrified that they have a part in this poison.
And he listens, culture. I think.
Well, you have to at some point. I mean, you can't be John D. Rockefeller and just, plow over everybody.
Not anymore.
Because there's too much communication. It's one of the great things about this new technology. It's a new level of moral growth and consideration and
of complexity.
Exactly. It's what we're doing here.
Well, on that note,
Reverend Dr. Keith,
Reverend Dr. Jeff,
I think we got it all sorted out once again.
I think we got sorted out with this extraordinary time. The Shrinking the Pundit is observing it with interest, usually with interest and excitement, occasionally with horror.
Yes, exactly. All right, Hallelujah. Dr. Keith. So appreciate you being here and appreciate everybody for listening and watching or whatever you're doing. And we'll see you next time for another episode of The Shrinking the Pundit.